Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gabriel Martin. Tēnā koutou. It's a pleasure to have you with us for another episode of Open Your Eyes to the Universe. If you're joining our program for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about what it is. It's a series of contemporary talks, conversations, open-eyed meditations, and interviews with people who inspire us, with people who uplift others by sharing their wisdom, their insights, and their experiences to co-create a better world. As we begin, the Youniverse team would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet. So we pay our respects to the elders of the past, the present, and the future, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to country. And we also acknowledge and respect the wise elder within all of us and the collective wisdom of all those here this evening. Now, last month on Youniverse, you'll remember that Carolyn Ward was in conversation with our special guest based in Germany, the esteemed psychotherapist, Patricia Heitze. They were exploring healing and the healing journey. In these times of fracture and divides, never before has it been more important to undertake the healing journey. As life becomes more fragile, and we're over-connected to the negativity of world news through social media, it's essential that our inner world is stable and strong. And their conversation focused on how to be anchored to our wholeness and not our vulnerabilities as we inevitably go through things. So Jan's going to put that conversation link in the chat box for those of you who've missed it or would like to hear it again. But here we are tonight, and we have two special guests with us from opposite sides of the hemisphere. We're with Samantha Fraser from Oxford, England, who's been working as a primary school teacher for nearly 30 years, and where she's joined by Dr. Annette Mortensen from Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Annette currently works for refugees as Survivors New Zealand as the manager of training and development. This evening, the two of them are going to be in conversation exploring the important topic of belonging. Now, we know from different social sciences that feeling a sense of belonging is right up there with food and shelter as a basic human need in order to feel secure, in order to feel healthy, and in order to flourish. So it's massively important. It's often defined as an affinity or connection to a place, people, or situation. Yet many of us struggle to belong, to gain and hold on to an experience of authentic place, authentic connection, and an authentic sense of belonging. Despite the exponential increase in technologies that enable instant and transnational communication and connectivity, increasingly we feel disconnected and disengaged. We're hardwired to connect, yet loneliness, feeling othered, alienated, or marginalized are overwhelmingly prevalent. And in terms of being physically displaced, at least 82 million people in our world today are homeless, displaced, or refugees. So never before has our sense of belonging, our need for connection to people and place, culture and language been so challenged. What does it feel like to belong, and what does it take to create belonging? This is the framework for our conversation this evening as Samantha and Annette explore these matters through their personal, professional, and spiritual journey. They'll be touching on isolation and identity, collective versus individualism as culture, power imbalance. They'll be looking at the rise in nationalism across the globe. They'll be touching on marginalization, alienation, and othering, looking at the impact of displacement and trauma. And they'll be looking at connectivity, integration, community, and co-creating. So it's a big agenda tonight. They'll be exploring how we might change old narratives around these matters through spiritual responses and through spiritual solutions. Now, viewers, as always, we really welcome your participation and your questions, and thanks to those of you who've already sent them in. I've got them and we'll be pitching them tonight. But for those of you who'd like to ask questions as we move along, then please do so. Just pop them in the chat box and we'll deliver those as well. Well, Samantha and Annette, it's a pleasure to have you both with us tonight. I'm delighted that you could join us, and I know our viewers are keen to meet you. Thanks for taking some time out to join us in this part of the world, and a very warm welcome to this place in the world that's known as Down Under. I can see you, Annette. Hello there, Annette.
Hello. Hi, Gabriel and Samantha.
And Samantha, I can see you too. Lovely to see you, Samantha.
Okay. Hi, Gabriel.
Samantha, I think it's just about breakfast time for you, and we just finished our dinner.
I just finished my breakfast.
Yeah, that's great. So that's a good way to start, first thing in the morning and ending the day over here. But thank you for joining us. Now, let me just tell our speakers a little bit, our viewers a little bit about you as our first speaker. As I mentioned, Samantha has been a primary school teacher for nearly 30 years. And although she was born in London and educated in the UK, she actually spent 20 years as an adult working in different countries in Africa. And it's amazing. It included Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique, Kenya, and South Africa. And in addition to her school teaching, she also travelled throughout Africa, running training courses for an international personal development program called Living Values Education. And that's a program that was a global initiative launched in New York in 1995. So a huge undertaking, something that she delivered enormously well. And Samantha's been meditating daily with the Brahma Kumaris for about 26 years. She's based at the Brahma Kumaris Global Retreat Centre in Oxfordshire, England, and you'll see her in one of the rooms there where we're interviewing her at the moment. And as a teacher with the Brahma Kumaris, she presently runs meditation sessions in a variety of self-development courses, and she runs these in schools, in hospitals, and other organisations in and around London and England. She combines her primary teaching career with running a personal development and meditation centre in South London called the Brixton Inner Space. She has an interest in bringing spirituality to the Black Lives Matter debate, organising events for the community, running courses on spiritual awareness and race awareness as a contribution to the Black Lives Matter movement. Samantha, wow, what an amazingly full life you lead. I'm delighted that you're with us. So maybe you could start by telling us about your journey of belonging.
Thank you, Gabby, for such a rich introduction. You forget the things that you've done over time.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? When you feed it back, you think, goodness gracious, such a lot.
Absolutely.
And some lovely, I can kind of see how it is that you would have moved from one thing and it would have kind of been a step into other things as well. So I'd love to hear about your journey of belonging.
Thanks, Gabriella. So I thought I would start way back as a child, actually, because I think my experiences as a young person, as a child, really was a preparation perhaps for my adult years. And so my parents are from the Caribbean islands, from a beautiful island called St. Kitts. And they came, my mother was 9 when she came to this country, to the UK, and my dad was 18. And at that time in the 50s, when my grandparents came over, their parents, there was this community of we call them Kittitians, or people from the different islands in the Caribbean. And of course, when you're in a new country, you tend to gravitate to people like yourselves, to people from your own island. And so that's what happened. And so I really feel that I grew up in two worlds, if you like. A world where it was very community-based, with uncles and aunts and cousins, and every weekend there will be some gathering either in our home or my uncle's home or my aunt's home, and there'll be food. My uncles will be playing dominoes, and there was lots of activity, lots of kids running around. And so it was very much a feeling of belonging and a feeling of connectedness, actually, to my community. And then, of course, you're having to navigate then the world outside of that when you start going to school and being in, of course, England, a Western kind of mindset. And what's interesting is that where you felt a sense of belonging in my own community with my own family and friends. When I went to school, particularly when I went to secondary school, we moved house, my parents, and my dad wanted to move us to a better area where there was less negative influence. And so he moved out of the community, which is very much a mixed community with Africans, Irish, Caribbeans. Then we went to another place, which was predominantly actually, I'd say, white middle class. And so in my school, I was put in the top stream. And for the first time, actually, I felt a sense of isolation because I was the only, in that class, the only Black girl in that class. And all the other Black students tended to be in the lower stream for whatever reason. Well, I know the reason. And so it was the first time when at age 11, I felt that I was different, you know, and I felt a sense of separation. It wasn't that it was obvious, but as an 11-year-old, you could begin to see that the world was quite different. The experiences of the friends that I had was quite different to the world that I was living in and coming from. And I think what you do because you want to belong, I found that I was, in a way, compromising my own experiences to try and fit in with the majority, right? And so in a way, what happened, looking back, it's like you, in a sense, you reject a part of yourself to be able to feel a sense of belonging, even if you, in your heart, knew that it wasn't really a reality. And then as I grew up through secondary school, and then it changed. And then, of course, in sixth form college, it was, again, a mixture of different cultures. And so I think that was a powerful seed in my early years as a young person, as a child. And I think the most, what can I say, significant experience in terms of this idea of belonging and feeling a sense of connectedness was when I went to Africa. I went to Tanzania. And for the first time, actually, it was funny to feel that I was the majority. You know, it's a very subtle thing. And unless you experience being a minority, you don't know what it feels like. And there I was now in Tanzania, and, you know, it's a beautiful culture, and you have successful people, you have the whole sort of class range in that country. And for the first time, I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to explain about my hair or whatever it was. And it was just refreshing. I can't tell you. And the reason why I felt a sense of belonging there was because you were accepted no matter what. No matter what your race or your culture or your color, because the culture there is you belong because you're part of a human family. And so if I needed help, if I knocked on my neighbor's door, I was greeted inside, I sat down, I met the whole family, and I even forgot why I knocked on their door. You know, I was kind of shocked and stunned that I was treated like I was part of the family straight away, and I was a complete stranger. And so I feel that it's such an important thing to really begin to create a space where people feel a sense of acceptance and a sense of belonging. And I really feel that that starts within myself. And I feel that because having embarked on a spiritual journey 26 years ago, I remember the year before I did the meditation course with the Brahma Kumaris, I was already searching. I was at university, I was studying. And I remember writing this poem. And it was called, I wish I still had that poem, and it was called, Who Am I? And the poem went a bit like this. And I even remember it even today. And it kind of went like, I'm a Black woman, a teacher, but I'm much more than that. Who am I? And I kept listing all the things that I defined myself by. And every time I wrote whatever it was, I belonged to the kitchen community, but that's not me. And that poem was really the turning point of an inner search to really discover who I am and who I really belong to, because the sense of belonging was very much limited to community or to my world of work. And then when I discovered the Brahma Kumaris, the meditation group, and I went through the course, I had a very unique experience of having a deep connection with myself. It was really profound. And I really feel that a sense of belonging is where I can begin to belong to myself, if that makes sense. Because I think on my journey, I did reject parts of myself. I hid parts of myself. And I think what I learned to do on this spiritual journey that I'm still on, I learned to begin to embrace aspects of myself, even the difficult parts of my own journey, I was able to embrace. Because if I don't do that, if I can't do that, then without wanting to, I am going to judge others and therefore create a sense of disconnectedness. I am going to resist or criticize. And the only reason for that is because of my unhealed trauma or an unmet need that wasn't met as a child, or that I wasn't even able to meet as an adult. And I don't think we consciously try to separate ourselves or create a sense of disunity or a sense of rejecting others. I think it happens because there's an aspect of ourself, and it's definitely from childhood, that I haven't been able to heal. And of course, in the adult years, there are things there too, but I think it stems from whatever happened as a child that I buried because I wasn't able to, I didn't have the resources, I didn't have the language to be able to understand what happened. Then it gets blocked or hidden. And then as we move through our relationships, things get triggered, and then we find ourselves reacting and feeling a sense of separateness or a sense of isolation. And so for me, just being able to create a space inside where I can really visit myself as a whole human being has helped me, I think, to create bridges in my relationships with family, with friends, with a spiritual community that I live in. And I think it always goes back to the relationship with myself and beginning to heal the parts of myself that have been damaged because of a sense of not belonging or a sense of disconnectedness. And I'd like to show a short clip just to really illustrate what I'm saying. You may have seen it before. It's called Step Inside the Circle. And I've seen it many times. It's about a 2-minute clip. And every time I see it, it has an impact. It moves me. It's a reminder of the importance of connectedness, the importance of acceptance, the importance of respect and understanding. So I'll ask that video to be shared if we can.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yes! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
So, yeah, very short video, but very impactful. And I think just one thing to say before I hand back to Gabrielle, but it's the sense of commonality, that I'm not alone in my experience, that I feel creates a sense of belonging too, because we all share not the same, exactly the same experiences, but very similar. And just being able to, in that clip, watch somebody that you might have known for many years in prison make the same step that you made because of having had that same experience is very powerful. And so to be able to acknowledge that we are all experiencing very similar experiences and just recognizing that creates a sense of belonging. I'm going to stop there and hand back to Gabrielle. Thank you.
Samantha, wow, it's you articulate it so beautifully and so clearly, making it very accessible. And I love some of the key words that I was taking on was, your talk about community with your family and friends when you were a very young child, and that sense of disconnect that came into your life when you were 11, I think 11 or so, in a different school environment, in a different neighborhood. And one of the powerful comments I'm remembering was that you said was that unless you experience being a minority, you'll never really know what it's like to be in a minority and what that means. And I'm very familiar with that video. I've watched it a few times myself and have been very taken with it, having worked in youth justice for quite a long time. And the sense of shame that happens to us when we are very disconnected, and that removes us from a sense of belonging, and how that shame silences us, so that it's so hard to step back into that space of light again, and regain that lost self, so that we can move into that state of self-acceptance and develop a sense of belonging. But I loved too that moment that you spoke of change in you when you were looking at your markers of identity, and you said a Black woman, a teacher, and so on, and you are writing that poem of Who Am I? That's very deep. Can you tell us a little bit? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that? How that came to you? And I know you said you don't have that poem anymore, but it seemed to me like a real change point, and these, I guess they're a little bit like epiphanies in a way, these moments of incredible change. And that's very deep, that question of who am I, and moving through these different identities that we hold so dearly, and where you came to with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, maybe to go back a little bit, because I remember as a young person, maybe before I maybe it was after I finished my degree, and then I was in Birmingham doing a postgraduate course in education. That's when I wrote that poem. But I had a couple of years out before doing my postgraduate, and I joined, at that time, there were a lot of schools for Black children where we were able to give them a sense of positive identity. And I went through a period where I only read Black authors because I was really trying to regain my sense of self, having been disconnected in my early years in secondary school. And then, of course, in my 16, 17-year-olds at that time, coming back to my sense of community and who I was. And so I read everything. And then, of course, when I wrote that poem, I think, although I had explored my own culture, there was still something that I felt was missing. And I remember when I was at Liverpool University doing my first degree, and I'd be out with my friends, and there'd be moments when I would just be watching everyone. I was watching myself even. It was seconds. I might be out at the disco or something at a party, and I would be watching it all and watching myself in it and wondering, is this it? And then I would bury that thought and then carry on, because that's what you did as a 21-year-old, all right, or 20-year-old. And then I think, so all of that, I think, was the foundation for this moment when, out of the blue, I sat down and I was writing this poem. And I think I was having those thoughts even before I wrote it, not consciously, but unconsciously. And so, having explored and gone to the other extreme of wanting to have a clear, positive Black identity, because, of course, as a minority, the images of the Black community in the UK and even in America is not positive, right? And there's all kinds of glass ceilings in terms of being able to reach certain positions and so forth. And so, having explored all of that and having enjoyed that exploration and gone to the Caribbean for the first time and met my family and all of that, still there was a question mark. And so I think there's this innate sense in all of us that I think is much more than a physical kind of identity, where we want to get back to the truth of who we are. And I think that was the beginning of my journey of really searching for something that was lasting, if you like, a solid foundation for my sense of who I was or who I am. And I tried different things, and still I was at the same point of something missing, Sam, something missing. And so there you have that poem, Who Am I? And it's funny because I read it to my friends. They went, Samantha, you're confused. And again, I think it got buried. And I was like, God, listen to this poem. I was really excited because I was like, wow. And they were like, Sam, are you okay? You're confused. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm confused. And I buried it again until I found the Brahma Kumaris a couple of years later. So yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? The influence of friends and influence of, well, everything, influence of language, influence of culture, influence of friends and family. Yeah. Samantha, I'm going to invite you to take us into a meditation if you'd be willing to. Just uncovering that sense of yourself as who am I? And I know there are viewers here asking that same question around trying to find a sense of where they belong and a sense of place and so on. So the meditation commentary from your personal experience on that would be gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, it's really important just to make sure you're sitting comfortably. And I'll start off just by doing a very short relaxation so that we get into the space together. So just sitting comfortably, and if you want to close your eyes, that's fine, or focus on the place in front of you, on the wall perhaps, that too is okay. Or in fact, focus on the image that's on the screen at the moment. And so as I sit here, just checking in with my level of comfort, relaxation, I consciously just relax my legs, letting go of any tension that might be there. Relaxing my arms, my hands. Relaxing the muscles in my stomach, my shoulders, my back, and just allowing myself to be very still and very relaxed. I take this time just to reflect on my own journey, this journey of belonging. And I recognize the moments when there was a deep sense of belonging and the things that contributed to that. And for me, it was a sense of community, a sense of family, being accepted, perhaps being in the majority, being able to look outside and see yourself reflected in the eyes and the hearts of others. And there have also been times in my journey when there's been periods of disconnectedness, periods of isolation or loneliness, not because of what things that people said or that were done, but just a feeling inside, because I couldn't see the reflection of myself in others. I didn't share the same experiences that they shared. But one pivotal thing that I discovered was to be able to learn to create a space inside. We all have a sacred space inside of ourselves. And when I'm still, when I stop being busy, when I stop avoiding, rejecting myself, it's only then that I can enter that space. And in that space, what do we find? We find light. The light that enables us to see ourselves as we really are. Because every single one of us wants to feel stable, safe, secure, peaceful. And when I simply stop and I spend time with myself, it may be a walk in the garden. It may be just being by the beach and looking at the waves of the ocean. It may just be my practice of meditation. Whatever it is, these opportunities to create a deeper sense of belonging, a belonging that accepts myself completely, accepts my whole story completely, the good, the bad, the difficulties, the challenges, doesn't matter. When I'm able to accept myself completely, then that's one ingredient that I can use to create a sense of belonging for others, to be present, to be available, and to be able to create a space of non-judging, just accepting and embracing. And it doesn't happen through words. It happens through my attitude, my inner world of thoughts and feelings that simply says, you belong. You belong not just to a small group of people that look like you or share similar views to you, but you belong because we all share one thing in common. We all belong to the same race. It's not the race of the color of your skin, but it's the race, the human race. And for me, that means wanting to feel a sense of inner joy, inner peace, inner stability. And we all want that. And when I begin to create that for myself, then I'm able to create the atmosphere for others to create it for themselves. And so in my journey of this question of who am I, I've understood that I'm much more than just my name. I'm much more than just the color of my skin. I'm much more than just my gender, my occupation, my religion. For me, if I have to answer that question today, I'd say I'm a being, a spiritual being, full of peace, love, and wisdom, just like you. Thank you.
Samantha, that was it's a very beautiful meditation. Thank you for that. Deep, full of so much wisdom, but I could feel your personal experience coming through in that meditation commentary. So thank you for that. And the tone of your voice, so much acceptance in it. It was very, very moving. Thank you. Well, viewers, I'd like to introduce our second speaker now, and I'm sure that Annette will have been listening intently to Samantha and may have some things she'd like to comment on as well, and we can have a discussion after as well. But let me just tell you first of all a little bit about Annette Mortensen. I know Annette as someone with a highly refined sense of social justice, and she's a passionate social activist. She says of herself, "I've been working with marginalised and vulnerable community groups throughout my professional career as a public health nurse, community development project manager, a researcher and an educator, and as well as a feminist activist, including work in the women's movement, the anti-apartheid movement during the Springbok tour of New Zealand, Aotearoa, in the 1980s, and the anti-racist movement subsequently. And Annette has worked for over 20 years to improve healthcare responsiveness for Asian, refugee and migrant groups in New Zealand in a number of roles, including as a public health nurse, a project manager, a researcher and educator. Following an extensive stint in public health nursing in the 1980s, Annette's focus during the 1990s was on sexual health, where she worked as the nurse manager of the Auckland Sexual Health Service, completing her Master of Philosophy in 2000 on destigmatisation, a grounded theory of the work of sexual health nurses. And from 2000, Annette held the position of Refugee Health Coordinator for the Auckland Regional Public Health Service. And then in 2007, Annette took up the role of Refugee and Migrant Project Manager for the Northern Regional District Health Board Alliance. And here she commissioned a number of studies, including the Asian and Middle Eastern, Latin American and African health needs assessments of people living in the Auckland region, and the Asian Health and Aotearoa Trend Studies. In that same year, 2007, Annette was awarded with the Supreme Harmony Award for her contribution to Muslim relations in New Zealand by the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand. In 2009, she received her doctorate from Massey University, and the subject, her thesis was Refugees as Others, Social and Cultural Citizen Rights for Refugees in New Zealand Health Services. And as I've mentioned, Annette now works for Refugees as Survivors New Zealand as the Manager of Training and Development. She's published extensively. She's been a member of the Brahma Kumaris organisation and has practiced Raj Yoga, meditation since 1981. Annette's someone who brings her spirituality into her work, and I know her as someone who cares very deeply and values connection and belonging personally and professionally. Annette, you've worked cross-culturally to foster belonging for some of the most displaced, traumatised and vulnerable people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I'm going to invite you now to tell us about your journey of belonging.
Thank you, Gabriel, and kia ora koutou katoa. Wishing everybody good health and well-being in the language of Māori, our Indigenous peoples in New Zealand. Firstly, I want to thank Samantha, and we've met online and it's been such a privilege. Samantha describes beautifully the experience of walking in two worlds, belonging to one culture and living in another culture, and walking between both of those cultures, which is so much the experience of the children and young people that I work with from refugee and culturally diverse migrant backgrounds. It's a balancing act, and sometimes people fall off. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. The video, Step Inside the Circle, was incredibly powerful and certainly referenced the levels of trauma and the impact of not treating trauma on vulnerable populations, which is part of the work that we're doing with refugee groups in New Zealand. I love the meditation. It was incredibly powerful. I'll just talk about the watershed that happened in New Zealand in the 1980s, because I want to speak to, in response to what Samantha was talking about in terms of her life as somebody from Caribbean history in Britain, and talk about the perspective of being from a majority culture and from a colonial background. In the early 1980s, with the Springbok tours, was somewhat of a watershed for people from a majority culture in terms of acknowledging the harm that had been done to Indigenous peoples in New Zealand. And what was triggered through our activism around apartheid was an understanding that we had a lot of work to do in our own society, that we needed to own that the removal of land from Maori, the almost obliteration of Maori language and culture through a range of assimilationist policies had done almost irreparable harm to Maori, and that we had major issues in terms of health, education and social statistics among Maori populations. We had high numbers of prison populations, were from Maori and later Pacific backgrounds. So there was the anti-racist movement started to agitate for policies to be embedded in government departments to address these issues. And as Gabriel said, I've been an activist and continue to be an activist to bring about social change. But like Samantha, activism wasn't what it was all about for me. I always knew that there was something more, and that the solution to the sort of social changes that we needed to bring about had a spiritual focus as well as a political focus. And that's at that time in the early 80s, I met the Brahma Kumaris, and something clicked into place. It was to do with the values that were being represented, and the practices of meditation, but it was also to do with these incredibly powerful senior women who I met fairly quickly in India, and the sorts of examples of change that they had brought about in their own lives and the values that they represented. So, in brief, that's my journey. But I'll talk about the work that I'm doing currently. So, as Gabriel said, I've been a practitioner of Raj Yoga since 1981 and have been very fortunate to be a member of Brahma Kumaris over the last 40 years. An organisation which has created a shared sense of belonging amongst its large international community and network of many nationalities, languages, faiths, and ethnicities, based on lived spiritual values of peace, love, and harmony. I live in Auckland, in New Zealand. It's our biggest and most multicultural city. It's the gateway city for many newcomers to New Zealand, both from refugee and many migrant backgrounds. We're a small country as far south as you can possibly go. And we, through significant changes to our immigration policy in 1986, have rapidly become a highly ethnically diverse nation in the context of a strong bicultural treaty partnership between Maori and the Crown. We're one of the most diverse nations in the Western world, alongside Australia and Canada. The theme of how to engage, support, and integrate newcomers is a big issue in our communities and neighbourhoods. And as Gabriel said, I've been working in the area of refugee resettlement for over 20 years. And globally, there've never been so many displaced people in the world than we have at the current time. It's now over 90 million, and less than 1% will be settled in a resettlement country. To qualify as the United Nations High Commission's refugee, mandated refugee, you have to meet the following criteria. You have to be a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, are outside your country of nationality and you're unable or unwilling, due to your fears, to avail yourself of the protection of the country that you belong to. That's about as far away from belonging as you can possibly get. That means that you are no longer welcome in your own country of origin, that you risk torture, persecution, and death if you stay. You don't belong anymore because you stood up against a corrupt system. The families and communities we're working with are from everywhere, from Sri Lanka, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Colombia, Burundi, Rwanda, Iran, Iraq, and many more countries. We see the refugee journey every day in the media. It's traumatic, devastating, dangerous, and it goes on for years and years. And we assume that it stops when people reach a safe country, but it doesn't. It's assumed that families will settle and adapt once they're in a resettlement country, but evidence shows us that arriving in an alien culture without the language skills of the host country, and often being visibly different from the community you've settled in, is the most traumatic experience of the whole journey. For the past couple of weeks, I've been visiting small towns in the South Island of New Zealand, where families are being settled. These are small, often country towns who are recovering from the impact of COVID, So the hospitality and tourism sectors have been taken a big hit, and now they're accepting refugee families. We're working with schools and school communities on creating a sense of belonging for newcomers who come from very different ethnic, cultural, and faith-based backgrounds from the communities they're entering. Schools are instrumental in making families feel welcome, and we heard wonderful instances of teachers going the extra mile to bring parents into the school community, setting up buddies and mentors for young people, taking extra time to help students catch up from years lost out of education. This is creating belonging. It's practical, it's kind, and it's deeply caring. Refugee trauma blunts the senses, not just refugee trauma, any trauma blunts the senses, the feelings, and the ability to connect and reach out to others. We teach teachers how to support traumatized children on their road to healing and recovery through brainstem calming activities that include meditation and mindfulness activities. Remarkably, our brains have an innate ability to repair and grow in spite of the unspeakable experiences we may have been through if we provide enough support. Belonging for refugee background children and young people is very complex. They want to belong to the new culture and community. They want to fit in, and their parents often want them to maintain language, faith, and traditional cultural values, and there can be a clash. They have big pressures to achieve academically. They want friends in mainstream communities, and they want to be accepted. And acceptance by important others is shown to be an important predictor of adolescent resilience. I just want to talk a bit about managing trauma. So talking about the issue of how we create belonging for everyone in communities we live in. Integration is a two-way street, and it depends on an open and accepting and responsible host society, and on the preparedness of newcomers to adapt to the new society they're entering. But it's not an equal relationship. The power sits with the host community. They control the institutions, health, education, social service systems. They set the tone for newcomers. They make services accessible and culturally acceptable, or they may fail to accommodate cultural and linguistic diversity and shut out families from receiving the services they're entitled to. What is not belonging like? Newcomers, particularly those who are visibly different from the host society, face racism and discrimination daily. It can be casual comments, scaling up to verbal and physical attacks. It's our responsibility to stop casual racism that we might hear around the family dinner table, in the workplace, and in our neighbourhood cafes. This is where it starts. Sadly, it's bystanding which is the most painful form of racism. And Muslim women have said to me, when they've been out on the street or on the bus and have been abused for wearing hijab, that the abuse is bad enough, but it's been the failure of other passengers to stand up for them that has been the most hurtful. We had a terrible tragedy in New Zealand on March 15th, 2019. The Christchurch mosque attacks, where 50 people were killed and many more were seriously injured by a lone white supremacist gunman. He didn't achieve what he wanted. New Zealanders turned out in droves and said, "This is not us." What happened afterwards was an outpouring of support for Muslim communities around the country. Volunteers arrived in droves in Christchurch to offer assistance. Non-Muslim people in neighbourhoods poured into mosques to give support, donating money, bringing food, and supporting the victims of the attack. families made efforts to make sure to check on their Muslim neighbours. We changed the gun laws within months. Creating belonging is about safe neighbours and communities and supportive, friendly neighbours. To do this work, we need to be mentally and spiritually well and resilient. Vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue is a very, very real risk in this field. Whether you're a social worker, doctor, nurse, community worker, or caseworker, or another role in the caring professions. If we take the perspective that we as individual professionals have to resolve all of the overwhelming issues that come our way, then we're on track to burn out. But if we can look at this in another way, from a spiritual perspective, that it's possible for me to be an instrument and to draw on the power of the divine and let that power do the service through me, then we can manage without compromising our physical and mental health. Whatever the faith, a practitioner comes from that practice of connecting to the divine, whether through prayer or meditation. And this is a source of enormous strength, wisdom, and can bring it with it the powers that we need to do this work. So I'm going to hand back to Gabriel now.
Annette, thanks so much for that. Thank you very much. A great, I was really moved when you were speaking, and one of the things I was remembering when you mentioned the tragedy in the mosque in Christchurch 3 years ago now was, and I was in Australia at the time, and I can remember switching on my computer and getting the latest news, and I saw that the gangs in Christchurch had come out and were protecting the mosques so that the Muslims could go into their mosque and pray without any fear of being gunned down again. Yeah, it was a great time of what can happen if there's the will to bring about some change, isn't it? And I remember there were love marches and school children moving through and saying, no, we're marching for love, we're not marching for hate. Yeah.
It was very powerful. Yes, I mean, communities came out and they set up a ring around the mosque so that people could go and pray in safely. Yeah,
it was. It's very and I love the response to the perpetrator was just ignored, and the Prime Minister saying we won't even speak his name again. He will remain nameless because he's seeking so much name. Annette, thanks for that. A lot in that. Samantha, I'm wondering if you're in there too, and how you're responding to what's some of the things that Annette was speaking about there.
Thank you, Annette. I when we met earlier, I remember you shared some of those examples, and again, it was very, very moving to hear them again and to really feel the passion that you have for the work that you do. But what really struck me was when you were sharing the Christchurch attack, and when New Zealanders came out and said, "This is not us." That just kind of, and it is about how you're perceived and being able to not be a bystander, but to make a contribution to creating a sense of belonging. For me, that was very powerful. And I do agree, actually, that the most dangerous form of racism, perhaps, is when you just watch it. You know it's happening, but you don't have the courage to step in. And I can relate to perhaps the feelings that the Muslim women had when, it wasn't so much the abuser or the person saying what they said, but it was looking around and seeing not one person stepped up to support you. And of course, there's a lot of fear and all of that. I can understand that. But I think I resonated with what you were saying, because I've experienced very similar things. I've heard of others that have experienced similar things too. But just to add, I think one other element that happens when you're not accepted, or when there is a kind of a perception of a particular type of person. That's very damaging when you internalize racism. You spoke about racism, Annette, but when you internalize it and you begin to be affected by it. I remember a friend of mine many years ago when I was in my 20s, and at that time, you know, Black young men were stopped just on suspicion. It was called the sus law, because they looked like somebody, probably not, but that's what happened. So that also created a lot of tension. So a friend of mine, he said to me, oh, I've brought this from, there's a shop here called Marks and Spencer's, but it doesn't fit me. I don't have the receipt. I said, well, just take it back. He says, no, but they might think I've nicked it. And I said, sorry, nicked it means they might have thought I've stolen it, translation. And I said, but you haven't. And he never took it back, because he knew if he was to walk in that store, he would be followed, and they wouldn't have believed that he had bought it. And that's another sad scenario when you don't feel a sense of acceptance, that you begin to internalize the images that are portrayed about you. And that's why I feel a connection, a spiritual identity is really a way of not buying into that, not buying into the images that others, or the perceptions or labels that others give you. So Annette, thank you for sharing, and it's good to learn some of the history about New Zealand. I know nothing about New Zealand, actually, so it's really good for me to just hear some of those stories and the history there too. Thanks.
Yeah, New Zealand had quite a connection to South Africa in the early 80s, wasn't it, Annette, when we had the Springbok tour here, and of course the biggest religion in New Zealand, Aotearoa, has been rugby, and it was a time of great reckoning, really, a watershed, I think you described it, of Annette, when large numbers of white middle class, professional, working class, in fact all races, came out and objected in protest to a white Springbok, a completely white Springbok rugby group coming to New Zealand and playing the New Zealand All Blacks, because of the apartheid, and that was a time when actually Nelson Mandela was still in prison, and it was an amazing time of, I think it spearheaded a lot of deep insight, and it was very successful as a movement of protest in terms of disrupting that agenda and putting apartheid on the Springbok, the apartheid issue in South Africa on the international media agenda. And when Nelson Mandela came to New Zealand quite a few years later, he was full of thanks for those actions. And it was quite remarkable, because I think at that time too, it meant that it actually penetrated families, like it divided families. It was exactly what you were saying, Annette. Conversations at the dinner table had to be had, if there was a dinner table at all. But these were conversations. You could not be a bystander. There were conversations to be had and actions to be taken about it.
It was a reckoning that, and a recognition that we had benefited materially, economically, socially from the removal of land from Maori, that we had to put that right, that we had to honour the treaty that had been signed between Queen Victoria and Maori and make that a living document. And, that continues to happen. It's not a fight that's over, but there has been significant effort as a society to put right those issues and to, pull up health status, education status over the last 30, 40 years. 30 years.
Look, I'm going to pitch some questions to you both, because there's quite a bit going on in the chat box here, which is lovely. And, I'm going to start with the ones, I've kind of started to group them together a bit. There's a lot here about belonging and search. So I'm going to read them out, and if you can just respond as you wish. So someone's saying here, for many years, I've been searching for where I belong without much sense of belonging. How do I have a sense of belonging without the longing or searching? I think that's a question that really will resonate with a lot of people. It's got so much feeling in that question. Someone else is asking something a little similar. How can I stop the feelings in my mind that keep playing in my mind that I don't belong, but I so frequently feel I don't? And someone else is asking, what are the steps to a sense of belonging? And there's another one here. What does it feel like to belong? I long to belong. How can I? I think you've all touched on that, but perhaps you'd like to make a specific response to that. Samantha, would you like to start with that one? These ones?
Yeah, it's quite a few. Maybe I take up how to stop the feelings in the mind that I don't belong. And as you said in your introduction, Gabrielle, that it's one of the basic human needs to feel that sense of belonging. And I suppose the way that I'd answer that is, in my own journey, I also went through periods where I felt I didn't belong, whether it was as a child or later on in my adult years. And I didn't always face those feelings directly. Perhaps I buried them. But I think we need to reach another sense of belonging. I think for me, what it indicated was that there was some disconnection within my own self. I hadn't really worked on the relationship with my own self, because for many years of my life, I had allowed myself, well, as a child, you don't have an option, to be defined by others and to take on their definitions of what it means to belong. And although I bought into that, I never felt a sense of belonging. And I had these thoughts that something was missing. And so what I really began to realize when I started to meditate was that I hadn't, for the 23 years that I had at that time, nobody had taught me to cultivate a relationship with myself. Nobody taught me that I had to belong to myself first. That was completely foreign. And I realized that because I hadn't developed a relationship with myself, a loving relationship with myself, that was having a direct impact on my relationship with others. And also this feeling of belonging to someone or to a community. And so my answer, it's a very long one getting there, that this is the first step for me. That let me ask myself the question, have I began to create a relationship with myself? And you may ask, well, how to do that? What does that mean? And it means creating space, creating time with yourself, and just being able to explore the emotions that happen when we get triggered by external situations. And now when I experience any level of high emotion, I ask myself the question, Sam, what are you still trying to take from another? And I think we're at a time where everybody is struggling in their own way. And I'm wanting something from another human being, and they can't give it to me. They can't create the atmosphere where I feel a sense of belonging, because they themselves feel a sense of disconnecting to themselves. And so I feel the journey or the work starts with each and every one of us, where I begin to repair the relationship with myself. Annette spoke about this connection with the divine. We can't do it on our own. And when we start at that point with myself, then I feel that we begin to feel a sense of belonging. That's not about somebody inviting me to a place, but it's just a feeling that I belong no matter what. Because I'm a child of that divine, as you are, and that's enough to give me a sense, to give me a right, but also to give me a sense of belonging. I don't need somebody to make me belong. I've waited for that for years, but now it's about, I know I belong, because we all belong to the same spiritual family, no matter what our physical differences are.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Samantha. Is there something that you'd like to add to that, Annette?
Yes, I totally agree with Samantha that it starts with knowing ourselves first and knowing who we belong to in a spiritual sense, being our own best friend. But it's also about, for me, healing ourselves from our own traumas, and we've all had those, knowing how to self-soothe, knowing so that we have the bandwidth to engage with others, and have the energies and the capacity to befriend others. You know, if we're in a situation of ongoing trauma, then we don't. We withdraw into ourselves. But I just want to talk briefly too about, you know, what happened in New Zealand society, where, you know, pretty much over a couple of years, the ethnic religious composition of the communities we lived in changed really radically. And for me, there was, and I'd never met Muslim people before. I hadn't met anyone from Africa because people hadn't started arriving until the late 80s. But I had this huge curiosity to know who other people were and to befriend. And as a result of that, I got invited to all sorts of like wedding parties and mosques and Buddhist gatherings, and it was an incredible experience. It was like the world came to our shores, and you just needed to hop on board and get to know people and be part of that. And the more I entered that world, the more I started to understand myself. And yeah, it's, I don't know. I think belonging in the community is about giving out, volunteering, inviting your neighbours over. It's all about that.
It's lovely. Annette, can I move on with that too? So it's another question here that I think springs a little bit from your answer, or moves nicely from the answer that you've just given. The question that's coming through is, what things are needed to create a sense of belonging?
Yeah. So at a practical level, people who don't speak the language of the host country need interpreters. They need qualified interpreters across all the services that they're using, so that they can actually be treated safely, and that they get the services that they're needing in an equitable sense with all the other populations. They need respect, and respect means allowing them to wear the dress that is acceptable for them, but also, and sorry, I'm getting a bit pragmatic here, but these things are quite important, but also, you know, making sure that we use forms of address that are correct for the age of the person that you're talking to. That, you know, we're really good at just calling everybody by their first name and being very casual, but that can be quite offensive to other cultural groups. But at a sort of neighbourhood level, it's, you know, asking other people's kids to come over for a play date with your kids. It's connecting kids. You know, sport is a tremendous connector, and we've had a campaign to get more girls from refugee backgrounds into soccer groups, and they love soccer, and it's a great way to get you know, young women physically active who haven't been, get them out of the house and get them connecting and making other friends with people in their community. It's about taking the extra time to make sure that those kids catch up educationally so that they don't get left behind in the back of the classroom being quiet and ending up, without basic educational skills at the end of their school life. It's going the extra mile. It's a teacher, making sure that in the curriculum that they're offering, they include the cultures and faiths of the kids in their class, so that all those children are aware of who they have in their class and can start having those conversations. Anyway, I won't keep going on, but it's all those things.
Thanks, Annette. That's rich, and I know there's a lot there. And of course, you can access some of those resources too that Annette and her team have been developing around how to bring greater inclusiveness into your community and create a sense of belonging.
I really completely agree with what Annette said in terms of the practical things. I think are the first step in being able to make any community or place accessible on a very practical level. But in terms of also our own personal attitudes, we've all been socialized in a particular way, and it's not a question of blame at all. But I think we also have to be ready to have very difficult conversations. I think we have, because I know that when, if I challenge somebody, I don't always do it because it's exhausting, but if I challenge somebody on something that they said that was for me racist, it becomes very, very, it becomes very tense. And now I'm not calling them, I'm just saying, the way you said that could have been rephrased, and everywhere goes quiet, particularly if you're the only person of color, and everybody's trying to defend their position. And it's not about that. It's about being ready to just look at the attitudes that we hold, because that's the way that we're brought up. There's nothing wrong with that. And I know when I've been with people that are ready to engage in that conversation, I feel a sense of belonging. I feel that they're really listening, actually. And I think the best thing that we can do in our connections is to really listen, because what people are saying, the words that they are saying, is not really what they mean. And to be able to reach another level in the conversation is so important. And I just wanted to share, recently I had a very difficult conversation, not about race actually, but this person asked to speak to me and for 20 minutes, and it ended up to be an hour and a half. And so the first 20 minutes I had to listen to my weaknesses, and I'm like that, and I'm like this, etc. And actually for the first time I wasn't defensive, because I kind of knew the space that the other person was in. And some of the things she said, I said, okay, I could take that on board. I don't really accept that, but anyway, that's your perception. And I spent 20 minutes or 15 minutes listening to how wrong I was. And I was just looking at this individual. And she was going on, and I could feel that I wasn't reacting to the things that she was saying. And then it reached a point where I said to her, very sincerely, do you know what? I really love you. And I meant it because this person goes the extra mile in what she does. And when I see people like that, I can somehow merge all the other things. This person will take the extra mile, will go out of her way to create a safe environment for people to really help. And when I said that, and she could feel that I meant it, there was a little tear coming out of her eye. And then the conversation just went to another level, where that person said, actually, what I just said was kind of meaningless, because at the end of the day, I'm not looking after myself. And it was like, wow. And then, of course, then I shared my own sort of personal journey. And then I felt that we met. I felt that we got beyond the stuff and we actually met and connected. And I feel one important ingredient is truly listening, but also being ready to have and engage in these difficult conversations, because if we don't talk about it, then it's going to come through our attitude. We can be doing all the best things in the world on the surface, but because of the way that I was brought up, because of things that my parents said about people of color, whatever it might be, or vice versa, what I was told about white people, that then becomes a block in our connection. And I think it's something that we all have to do, I think, just to really explore some of the attitudes that are buried and come out when you're in a in a difficult situation. So I just wanted to add that. And now I've forgotten the question, Gabrielle.
I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased we pushed pause to enable you to make that response. I had a feeling to get it in the moment, or you might forget it, and the question can come in a moment. But yes, that need for courageous conversations or difficult conversations, and but just a willingness to step into that space and begin the conversation. It's so important, isn't it? But also, it's so rewarding. I think that's when we really make big movement towards beautiful, authentic relationship, of moments of deep connection. We're actually really, what we're doing, I think, is just allowing others to be who they are, and allowing myself to be who I am, and yeah, moving it from there. Such a nice way to begin, isn't it? And those deep spaces. Yeah,
it's very, very special moment when you get there.
Hey, look, when you get there, I've got some lovely comments coming into the chat box. I'm going to read them to you both. Thank you both so much. Thank you so much to both of you. So much wisdom. Appreciated it very much. Virtual hug, virtual hug, virtual hug. So there's some lovely comments coming in to Samantha and Annette. We're running out of time, but I will pitch this question again if I can, Samantha. It was coming into you, but Annette, you may have some comment you might want to make as well. It was coming on the back of your remarks, Samantha, about the relationship with yourself, that being the primary relationship to get a sense of belonging. And this question is, how then do you improve and strengthen your sense of connection to self?
I think for me, it's a daily practice. And one is my daily routine as a meditator that has become, for me, a lifeline. I get up very early in the morning. I start my day with reflection and silence and meditation. And also it's been my own connection with the source or the divine. And I said earlier that it's not possible, I think, to be able to sustain or improve a connection with myself unless I have some help. And so for me, it's really this connection with the source, where I'm able to see myself as I really am. Because I think if you don't have a higher vision of yourself, you don't have anything to work towards. And so when in meditation, when I connect to source or to the divine, I feel a sense of love, a sense of security that I've never felt before. And in that connection, I feel that what I'm hearing is, let go of your limited image of yourself and see yourself through my eyes, not physically, but metaphorically. And the more I'm able to step into that vision, or my higher self, the more I'm able to let go of the limited sense of self that's based on my story, that's based on the definitions that others have given me. And so one, for me, is discipline, being consistent in my practice of meditation. But two is really beginning to take that power from that source, from the divine, so that I can begin to do my own inner work. And it's daily beginning to embrace our own beauty. I think that's the biggest challenge. And then, of course, being able to let go of our weaknesses and not to keep identifying with the mistakes that we make, but every day being able to embrace our own inner beauty that every single one of us has. And I think that takes courage to say, I am special, all right, not with ego, but I am special. I am beautiful. I am peaceful. To step into that reality and to own it and to be ready to sustain it no matter what. And I think because I do have an aim where I do want to get to a stage where there is that stability and feeling of security. I'm not there yet. I feel when we have security, then it's much easier to be able to naturally create a safe space for others, to be able to create feelings of peace and love and a sense of belonging in a very natural way. At the moment, we're trying, we make effort to do it because we know what we need to do. But when it's natural, then that's a different kind of experience. And so that's my daily nourishment, if you like.
Thank you, Samantha. And I'm remembering a comment that the esteemed yogini Daddy Janki once made, and she said that if you want to belong, then you need to contribute. So a lovely connection between contributing and belonging. Annette, can we ask you a question, a quick question before we close out with a meditation from Samantha? Just on that aspect, you mentioned faith, and as Samantha's also mentioned, and you've mentioned the divine. What role does the divine play in your sense of belonging?
Well, I want to just endorse what Samantha was saying in her response to how do you strengthen connection with the self. And one of the things that's been, I guess, is plus side from COVID is, an enormous availability of connection through social media with Brahma Kumari's community and with a lot of classes, and in a way that hasn't previously been possible. And so for me, because I live way down south at the ends of the earth, feeling part and connected to this huge international community has been really a wonderful resource. In terms of talking about accessing the divine in my life and in my work since 1981, I have continued to explore the relationship with the divine in multiple ways. As a friend, teacher, healer, mediator, companion, constantly looking at the powers that I need for the situations that I'm in. And those that connection has enabled me to be resilient, keeps me in contact with who I am in essence, not the physical self, but the spiritual self, but also gives me the ability to connect to a wide range of people and to keep healing and growing. Yeah, it's precious.
Thanks, Annette. Look, there's so much more we could have we could continue to have this conversation for quite a while longer. I'm sure there's a lot of things you've touched on, both of you, and we've only just touched on them without going into a lot of depth, but big treasures anyway. We are going to have to bring it to a close. And as we close out, Samantha, would you be happy to do a second meditation commentary for us, please? Is that going to be okay?
That's fine. Yeah, I can do that.
Right. Let's do that then.
So once again, just sitting comfortably and just reflecting on what you've heard this morning or this evening. And just really feeling a sense of appreciation for just this whole aspect of belonging and the importance of it. And as I enter that space inside, a space of comfort and peace and silence, I'm able to ask myself the question, what is it that I need to do to create a sense of belonging with myself first. And I think the first important thing is in my daily timetable to create spaces where I can be with myself, where I can touch my own inner qualities of stability and security, but that's not based on anything external or physical, but where it's just based on a recognition of my true identity. When I'm aware of being more than just my physical body, it's like I enter a different reality, a reality that heals the past, a reality that allows me to be present for others and for myself. And in this understanding of myself as just a spiritual being, I'm able to develop a deep connection with the divine. The divine is one who is constantly overflowing with love. That love is unconditional. That love is all embracing, all accepting. And it's in that love of the divine that I find a true sense of belonging, a belonging that transcends my own family, my own community, but it's a belonging that embraces each and every individual in this world. And so it's just one source, many different names for that source, but one source. And so with that understanding, it means that we're all connected, not physically, but spiritually. And whatever the qualities that the divine has, we all have. We all have these inner qualities of peace, of love, of wisdom. And all we need to do is just create space to feel them, to see them, and to connect with Source, with the divine. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. That was another beautiful commentary, very grounded, very wise, and very clear. Thank you for that. And of course, a very big thank you to Annette and Samantha, both of you, for joining us on Youniverse this evening and sharing your journey of belonging. So it's our thanks and our blessings for the contribution that both of you have made and that you continue to make to foster authentic belonging. So thank you, our blessings and love to you both. Now, viewers, you may like to browse our online bookshop, Eternity Inc., which has a huge range of books on self-empowerment and spirituality that enable you to really feel like you're developing a sense of belonging spiritually. And as always, they're at not-for-profit prices. And if you'd like to subscribe to Open Your Eyes to the Universe, and by doing so, you'll receive monthly updates, please email us at special.events@au.brahmakumaris.org. And finally, I'd like to let you know about, excuse me, our next episode of Open Your Eyes to the Universe. It's on Saturday, the 25th of June at 6 p.m. It's AEST. And as we close out tonight, this particular episode of Open Your Eyes to the Universe on belonging, I'm going to close out with a song from Bliss. It's called Come Into the Light. And until we see you again in June, may you strengthen your sense of belonging by appreciating and accepting fully who you are and appreciating others for who they are. and may you enhance your sense of belonging by contributing positively to community and building an authentic future of wholeness and connection. Om Shanti.
Where do I go with all these feelings and all these faces and open doors when everyone else seems so serene and I just feel so insecure? And where do I go when all the pieces of my heart lay on the floor? You say, come into the light, why don't you? Come into the light, why don't you? Come on now, come into the light. Where do I go with all these memories and all these bags filled up with shame? And how should I feel when you call me an angel and dress me in a crown of gold? And what should I do when tears of sorrow just won't stay inside these eyes? You say, come into the light, why don't you? Come into the light, why don't you? Come on now, come into the light. What should I do when a gentle-headed reaches out to take my own? And how should I feel when tears of joy, they just won't stay inside these eyes? And what will I do when I start to love you and really trust and know you're there? You say, you'll be in the light where I am. You'll be in the light where I am. Come on now, come into the light.